thank you to GiGi's. A huge thank you to GiGi's Playhouse for inviting me to speak. And I was just telling Rosella now that when GiGi's opened in 2012, we were living on the Upper West Side, and we knew one of the original founders, Britt Say, and my husband and I actually spoke at the opening, and we spoke about our vision for inclusion. So that was long before I ever planned on writing a book or had any idea that I would have such a message to share. But I guess raising Kayla has given me a lot of messages on this topic. So it's truly a pleasure to be here. So thank you to all of you. And, you know, there will be a recording, and I'd love you guys to share this with as many people as possible. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and I'm going to get into a little bit of my story. I'm dedicating my class to my mom, who recently passed away, sadly, from COVID. And the reason I believe there's such a powerful lesson in my lesson with my mother, that's a lesson for all of us. And that is, my mother grew up in an orphanage, and she, you know, she was the youngest of like 8 children, and her parents were immigrants. This was in South Africa, and her mother died when she was young. And she was the youngest in her family, and her father put her in an orphanage Monday to Friday while he worked, and just brought her home on the weekend. But it clearly left a big emotional impact on her, and she really was not someone who expressed her emotion. Anyway, when I was in South Africa, I went after the funeral, Jewish people said Shiva. It's where for 7 days, people come and pay respects. And I was like totally amazed. My mother had been a public school teacher for 25 years in a Jewish day school. And people came from far and wide to pay their respects and say thank you. She was like one of those old school teachers who really cared about education, and she really cared about her kids learning, but she was strict. And when I lived in South Africa, people would be like, "Are you Mrs. Newman's daughter?" And I'd be like terrified, because I'd be like, "Oh my God, they're going to think I'm her." And to me, that was a scary thing. So that was my story about my mom. And all these people were coming in, and it was really interesting because the neighbors came in, and South Africa's falling apart, and she's the person who goes to fight the municipality every time something's not working. And they're like, "Who's going to take a stand for our whole community?" And there was a gardener, someone who had worked for my parents for 35 years. And when he heard, he started crying, and he was like, she had been his protector. She had helped him find jobs. She was taking on the underdog. And my mother was also this hostess that hosted all my cousins, you know, from bar mitzvahs to wedding parties to 50th wedding anniversaries. She hosted all these events. She was like, and when all my family came, they expressed such gratitude. And I suddenly saw my mother in a very different light. And I had a really interesting conversation with someone. Soon after, I went back to Israel, and I was at synagogue, and someone was like, "Wow, I can't believe you're hosting guests so soon." And I was like, "Well, that's what my parents always did. They always had, you know, guests in their home. That's what my parents would have wanted me to do. They wouldn't want me to do it any other way. They wouldn't want me on the Sabbath to be sad and not hosting guests." And it was really interesting because she looked at me and she was like, "Jodi, that's so interesting that your mother hosted all these guests and she was such an influence on you. She's like, you host guests all the time, yet you dedicated your entire book and your whole story to a Holocaust survivor. Why didn't you dedicate it to your mom?" And I was like shocked. I was like, she really caught me there. I was like, it's a really good point. And I think that at the time when my journey started and I started becoming more involved in Orthodox Jewish life and that, I was very much influenced by anyone except for my parents at that point. And sometimes we get stuck in a conversation, we get stuck in a story, we get stuck in a reality. And this is the first lesson of this talk, is about sometimes we have to just create new stories. We have to move on. Like, part of being able to take challenge in life is to be able to move on. So I've been writing a blog. I have a crazy life. I've been to 87 countries, 50 of with my children. We travel kosher. So if anybody on this is kosher, they know what a challenge it is. We travel on a budget. We keep the Sabbath. We keep all the rules. There's nothing simple about the way we travel. I host thousands, and I say BC because before COVID, life's been a bit different since. But every year we host thousands of people. Every week, people are in our home. I have a daughter with Down syndrome, and I speak very openly and honestly about our situation, and I write about it. And then we moved to Israel, which is definitely a crazy thing to move to another country when you've just figured out one system, to go to another country, you figure out another system in a foreign language. And I was writing a blog, and people were like, Jodi, you should write a book, you should write a book. And I just didn't do it until I had this like pivotal moment. I was overseas with a group that I was taking. I run a young professional group as another hat I wear. And I told a little bit of my story. And there were people listening to my story. There were people who, they would happen to randomly be in the same room as me. And they were like, wow, Jodi, we're so impacted. And they weren't like me. They didn't look like me. They didn't dress like me. They didn't act like me. And they said, this is one of the most inspirational stories I've ever heard. And it was that day that I made the decision that I was going to write the book. And until that time, I had it in my to-do list. You know how you have a set time on recurring Monday and Wednesday every week to do something. But I didn't really do the book. But from commitment comes so many things. As soon as the book launched, my voice was out there, and I've had an opportunity to speak to thousands of people. And one of the things I promise you in the book is I can make you both laugh and cry. But really, most of my book is a message about changing your reality. So my book opens like this, and I'm going to read it because it sets the tone. It was the time when our lives changed forever. I was recovering in my hospital room in Manhattan a few days after giving birth to our third child. And my biggest concern was how to keep my newborn warm in the taxi on the way home during a typical gray, bitter New York winter. Gavin and I had already sent photos of our baby girl to friends and family all around the world, informing them that the mother and baby were doing well. Congratulatory flowers and balloons provided a colorful contrast to the gray skies. And of course, we were feeling on top of the world, as couples normally do after having a new baby. That was until the pediatrician walked in on the third day and said, Mrs. Samuels, did you do genetic testing? Those were the words that changed my life. I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate to that. As we checked out of the hospital and the security guard snipped identification bracelets from our wrists, Gavin looked at me and said, they may as well have branded activists on our forehead. We knew as we headed into the world that our future would be one of tireless advocacy, struggles for acceptance, and crusading for our child's rights on a daily basis, whether it was schools, government, or social settings. So I grew up in Jewish Johannesburg. I was not from an observant Jewish family. I had like a crazy journey. I met a cute guy on the bus. He asked me if I was going to go to synagogue. That encouraged me to take a gap year. I started getting friendly with these kids, and they were all going on a gap year program to Israel. I went to Israel on this gap year program. The Gulf War broke out in that gap year, and I landed up going to England for a few months during the war. And I met this Holocaust survivor couple who had been through so much. And I landed up through a series of stories how I landed up at their home. But I walked in and I was really hungry. I was like the student living on chocolate bars and no money. And they were, are you hungry? And I'm like, no. And they insisted I sit down, eat a meal with them. And that became the beginning of many, many meals. But it also became the beginning of a friendship that directed and guided me. And for us, lesson number 3 for all of us is when we're going through this crazy, crazy journey called life. And so for some of us, with the challenges of our children, it adds an element of craziness. You really need, in like Jewish proverbs, we say to find yourself a rabbi and a friend. But that means for all of us, you need to find someone who can be your spiritual mentor and your friend. A friend, someone who also has your best interests at heart. When I moved to Israel, I was all of 18. I went there for a year. I swung a pendulum. I was this wild kid. I then went backpacking. I arrived back in Israel, and I decided, in fact, I didn't want to be on this religious journey anymore. And I cut my skirts really, really short. And in those days, I guess I had better legs. And I was walking up this like big set of stairs, and this really cute soldier in uniform came and offered to carry my bags. And when you're 18 and a tall, dark, handsome guy offers to help you, you think you've died and gone to heaven. He happened to be like a really cute guy. And we started talking. We landed up speaking for 6 hours. He was so different to anyone I'd ever met from my community, everybody looked the same, dressed the same, acted the same. And I landed up getting engaged at all of the age of 18. My parents were horrified. They thought I'd been kidnapped by a cult. They desperately, desperately wanted me to end this relationship. And I was talking to a friend, bearing in mind I'm still 18 at this point, talking to a friend on the street corner. And I'm telling my friend all about how confused I am. But at the end of the day, I was like, I don't know what I want. And as I was saying this to her, and someone walked up and he said, excuse me, do you want to speak? Do you speak English? And the way I answered, he could hear I was South African. So we had a little chat. He was a doctor. And the short of the story is that question changed my life in another way. He's the guy who became my husband. And we had this vision that we wanted to live in Israel, but we had student loans to pay off. So we went and we lived. I don't know if any of you have seen Northern Exposure, about like a doctor going to these outback places. And my husband was the only access to life. He would like bring the mail. And in those days, it was video cassettes and the pharmacy, and he would travel by. And we were living this crazy life. And then we won green cards. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the green card lotto. So the green card lotto is a diversity lotto that 50,000 people can apply for. We applied and we won green cards in this green card lottery. And the next thing, we were moving to New York City. By the time we got here, we had lived in 9 cities, in 5 countries, in 27 apartments. We arrived here in 2000, completely lost. One of my most enduring memories was the first week we were here. I planned to meet my husband. We had a landmark, Hotel Pennsylvania. And I called to make a doctor's appointment, and they asked me what my zip code was. And I didn't know what my zip code is. I didn't even know what a zip code was. Overseas, we don't use the word zip code. And I started crying because I realized I was really starting my life from scratch. But we had progressed from that, and we got jobs, and we had great careers, and we were living in a nice apartment, and we had 2 gorgeous children, and we had thousands of people in and out of our home. We were running this organization on the side. And if you would have asked all the singles in those days, they would have been like, when I grow up, I want to be just like the Samuels. Picture perfect life. And that was until February 25th. When the doctor walked in and said those 5 words, Mrs. Samuels, did you do genetic testing? Those words that changed my life. I had this mother's intuition that something was wrong. I remember where I was very specifically. We were exactly, it was about 6 weeks before my daughter was born. And I was sitting somewhere and I had this overwhelming fear that something was wrong. And I came home and I told my husband, and I was crying, and he was like, Jodi, all the results are fine. Why do you think this? There's no indication. And I was like, oh, we don't know, and I came up with all these things that you wouldn't find based on testing, that we wouldn't know about. I just had this intuition. Like, I remember my father calling, and he said, so how's my baby doing? And I hesitated. And he said, what's wrong? And I was like, nothing. I mean, nothing objectively was wrong. And then I made my husband come to the OBGYN with me, and I started crying there. And she's like, why are you crying? You're so stoic. There's nothing wrong. But, sometimes as a mother, these things. And when they were prepping me for the cesarean, I wasn't praying like, please, God, give me a healthy baby. I was praying, please, God, give me the strength to deal with whatever the challenges that come my way. When the doctor walked in and he said those words, I knew what Down syndrome meant. In fact, I have a cousin who was born in the 70s, and she was born in 1970 exactly. And in those days, my aunt was counseled to, especially in South Africa, to give up the baby and see her as little as possible. There was a lot of trauma in my family around that. And I knew what Down syndrome looked like. The synagogue I went to was next to the Jewish home for the disabled, what they called it in those days. And I remember seeing these people with Down syndrome, and I couldn't actually look at them. I was uncomfortable. I mean, I didn't want to look at them. It made me uncomfortable to even look at them. Here I am, and the doctors walked in, and I know what he means, and I sat bolt upright. Terror. I mean, things went through my head. How was I going to be this hostess who was going to host thousands of people and travel the world? And I was going to be this successful business person. I hadn't yet made it to the front page of Forbes, Fortune, Business Magazine. I had grand ambitions. Terror, how was I going to do this? But also for her siblings, what did this mean for their future? What does it mean for my marriage? And I went to the bathroom, and I had to look in the mirror. And that was really the beginning of my journey, when I had to really say, who am I? What do I want? What does God want from me? And I had to have this really honest conversation, because, yeah, I want to be this businesswoman, this mother, this wife, this crazy Jodi. But I also realized I'd had 2 miscarriages between my middle daughter and Kayla. And I felt, for whatever reason, God wanted me to have this soul, not another soul in my life. In addition, we had this open door. Like, if you came to my home, I mean, I used to have these arguments with my dad all the time, because he would say, New York's not safe. And I'd be like, no, I'm in a doorman building. And my door was quite literally open, like literally on the hinge, always open. People walked in and out. Like, you guys will appreciate it, because if you live in Manhattan and doorman and you understand this, after like seeing so many people walk in and out my house for so long, one day one of the doormen said to me, I know what you do. You run a soup kitchen for Jews. Because I had so many people in and out of my house. That was the only reasonable conclusion that but I was like, this is when I'm having this conversation. I'm like, if I'm that person, and everybody's welcome in my home. And it doesn't matter if you're lost, lonely, searching, single, looking to get married. People were always in and out of my house. And here suddenly I'm this person who's not welcoming to my own child. There is, there's something very wrong if I'm not opening to my own house. And I had to make a decision then to be victor or victim. You know, one of the great rabbis says we achieve greatness when we teach, when we give our children the values to the next generation, when we transfer our values to the next generation. And I knew that I didn't want Kayla to be a burden for my children. I wanted my children to not see their parents crying and everyone around them like, and we had to make a new story. We had to change our story. We also realized we had this opportunity to be a beacon of light, that we could change other people's knee-jerk reaction. How we handled this was how other people would respond. We had sent a message to 8,000 people in our database saying, mom and baby doing well. And we sent another message explaining that our princess was born with challenges. We explained that she had Down syndrome, but we made sure everyone understood that she was still our princess. When we were leaving the hospital and they check your band on your hand to make sure you're not stealing the baby, and they checked my husband, who jokes all the time, was, well, they might as well just branded activist on our face. He didn't realize how prophetic he was when he said that. Little did we know that just a few days after that, we would be defending our daughter's right to exist when a neighbor came to visit. And there she is standing in our house, and she's like, what? You didn't do an amniocentesis and abort? I don't understand. How could you have not aborted? And I was like, well, clearly I didn't abort. I'm holding the baby. So it's like, what's the purpose of that question? In fact, we got so many stupid comments, like in hindsight, at the time they were like heart-wrenching. But my husband wanted to have a t-shirt made for Kayla saying, I have an extra copy of chromosome 21 that accounts for my mental retardation. What's your excuse? But I think we realized soon that it was the next lesson for us was when you can't change your reality, and we all know this, you can't put them back in the oven and you can't change the challenges. The reality is the reality. The only option we can do is change how we see that reality. This wasn't easy. It wasn't like I was like, oh, okay, now tick, I've figured this out. I was very confused. I was like, why me? Why us? My family, we do so much good in the world. We do this, we like us, me, why us? But as a businesswoman, one of the things I do is I help startup businesses figure out how to grow, what their mission statement is. And I was like, what is a mission statement? A mission statement tells you why a business does something and why it exists. And I realized that I needed, and this was the next lesson for me, I needed my own personal mission statement. I needed to understand what was my purpose, what is my plan in my existence, why do I exist? In Jewish philosophy, in the Talmud, they teach us that a father should teach his child to swim. What does it mean a father should teach his child to swim? It really is teaching us that every child needs to have survival skills. But really, that's us as well. All of us need to have survival skills. And by having a mission statement, we give ourselves a framework to work in. We have a mission. By having a mission, we have a purpose, and we have a plan to move forward. At age 2, we went to apply to the local Jewish day school, a private Jewish day school on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where Kayla's siblings were going. We really struggled to get the meeting. The principal was really not responsive. The school didn't get back to us. And we walked into the meeting, and we've all been to one of these meetings where you know exactly what the people think before the meeting starts. And the rabbi's sitting there with an assistant and their arms are crossed, and he says, you called this meeting. What do you want? And we're like, well, actually, what we want is for our 2-year-old daughter to come to your school just like her siblings. And he was like, well, and giving us all these excuses. We're like, the stated goal of your 2-year-old program is communication and socialization skills. We're asking, first, we're not asking for high school. We're not asking for guaranteeing to Harvard or Princeton. We're asking that you give her an opportunity to come to a 2-year-old program. Eventually, we finally got an answer back from the school. The rabbi calls me and he's like, Mrs. Samuels, I just want to let you know the answer is no. We spoke to hundreds of professionals, and everyone unanimously agrees our school isn't a fit. I'm like, really, Rabbi? You spoke to hundreds of professionals? Not one of those professionals assessed her, interviewed her, met her, yet hundreds of people unanimously, professionals that is, unanimously support this. I said, could you just name one professional? Not hundreds, just one. The answer still remained no. And for us, this was very, very hard because we were locked out, and we felt we were locked out of the Jewish community. We were locked out of school. And part of the reason I tell you my story in the beginning is because we did not grow up Orthodox Jewish. We did not grow up observant. We chose this path. We spent a lot of our lives choosing which direction we wanted to be. And now suddenly we're locked out. It was very, very heart-wrenching for me. My husband had to keep reminding me, don't judge Judaism by the Jews, judge it by what it's supposed to stand for. We decided that we're going to reach out to the board, that we're going to take this further. We contacted, and it happened to be that the two co-presidents of the board, their daughters had in 6th grade, their project for their kindness project. They both were coming to my house every week to play with Kayla. I have to tell you, I could give you guys another whole class on why I hate those like superficial kindness projects, why I hate those projects where, you know, kids learn at school that if you give an hour of your week volunteering, then tick, you're done. They never learn to open their hearts, their homes, their schools, their churches, their synagogues. Like we in effect, by giving them these 1 or 2 hour a week projects, we're actually teaching our kids, like, you know, give a fake smile, spend an hour, write a check, tick, and then you're done. Anyway, we pleaded, and they said, when we got to the meeting, they gave us a 15-minute allocation. And they said, the answer is no, and it's going to continue to be no. And we said to them, we're asking you to do what's right, not what's easy. And that became our rallying cry. We're not asking you, we're talking about a private Jewish day school with resources, and she's going to come with a basket of services from New York City, and we full fee paying parents. We're not asking you to do something, just give us a place. We're asking you to partner with us. But they said no. Eventually, I decided I wanted to address this issue. And the school made one of those big no-nos, you know how when you forget to blind carbon copy? So they'd sent a message to the entire school community without blind carbon copying. And I had the entire school list, and I wrote a letter. And I addressed it to the rabbi, but I wanted to tell him a story, and I wanted him to understand our side of it. And I said, Rabbi, we are family, anybody knows us, we're a very involved family, we'll roll up our sleeves, we full fee paying parents, she'll come with services from New York City. I said, but what I really am asking you to consider it from a perspective, and my son Meron at the time was 8 years old. And I said, I really want you to consider it from the perspective of Meron, my 8-year-old son. One day, and you guys will appreciate the story because you all live in New York. Sometimes I tell the story and people don't know exactly the story, but we have, like, you know, in New York, you have a beggar on your street corner, and our beggar Diane, who had been standing on our street corner since my kids were born, and she had watched my kids grow. And every time I had a kid, she would arrive at the door with a bag of fluffy toys that the doorman would call me in horror. And I would have to like take the toys and say, thank you. And Diane really knew, like she knew when, whose birthday it was. She knew, I'll tell you a funny story. Like once my husband, I came home with someone to the apartment. She was waiting at the top of the stairs and she saw him and she was like, your wife went into the apartment with another man. But don't worry, he's pudgier than you. So she knew everything going on. And my husband usually gave her $1. So one day he gave her $10. And my son said, Abba, that's dad, Abba, why did you give $10? And Gavin explained that when beggars, some of them, when it's freezing cold, some of the supers will let them sleep in the basement of a building, but they have to pay. So he gave her $10, and Miran's like, but Abba, next time, don't give her money. She can sleep in my bed. And then he said, but don't tell Ima, don't tell mommy. And he thought like he was going to say, don't tell mommy, because mom's going to say, oh, she's dirty or she has germs. And he said, don't tell mom, because she'll tell everyone how proud she is of me, but that's just what good people do. And I was like, Rabbi, I'm asking you to reconsider. If nothing else, one day, Kayla's siblings are going to say, where was my community? Where was my synagogue? Where were the values? Anyway, the story landed up going with threats and accusations, and we were told that the school had started a legal fund to keep us out of the school. I can't even begin to tell you everything. You have to read the book if you really want to know what happened. But I remember once being in Fairway, and some woman came up to me and she was like, Jodi, what do you think your other children will think about what you're doing? And I was like, I really think my other children will think I'll always go into bat for them as well, no matter what. The whole story continued to escalate until we got an email. Just remember, the rule, never put anything in email that you don't ever want other people to see. A board member of this Jewish day school sent us a message. And this is a Jewish day school, a school that's supposed to believe in the value for a life. She sent us the message and she said, you chose to bring this problem into the world. Don't make your problem our problem. I'm like, actually, God used to bring this problem into the world. But can you believe that in New York City, and this is 2010 in New York City, everything could go here. You can be gay, lesbian, we have Black presidents, you can have everything. That's all. But to have the right to choose whether you kept your child with special needs, and I was being questioned. It was around January, and it was Martin Luther King Day. And I read a quote, and the quote went like this, and it said, we begin to die when we're silent about the things that matter. And I realized that day that I need to take a stand on this issue. So many people in my circle didn't understand how challenging it was to find a space for a child in Manhattan for a school. People in my inner circle didn't know, but I also realized that there were so many families with children with disabilities, needs, challenges, who needed to also feel empowered to take a stand. So I decided to organize a community forum. And because I organized a lot of events, I had like media contacts, I sent it out, and I arrived at my event, and Jodi style arrived a little bit late. And I get there, and in New York, you've seen this before, but when they have the media vans and there's like all the vans and the lights are flashing and they're parked outside the venue, and I walk in and there's like 200 people in the room. And afterwards, the media wanted to interview me. Nothing better than like a story of like Orthodox Jews making the front page of every newspaper. We were like every half an hour on New York One when it repeats. So I said to my husband, okay, you speak. And he's like, no, you wanted to do this, you speak. And up until that point, I had never really spoken publicly ever. I was behind the scenes, this powerhouse, I was an organizer, but never ever asked me to speak publicly. My lip would quiver, my eyes would fill with tears. But in that moment, I had to find my voice. And I joke, I came from finding my voice to becoming Mama Grizzly. And you can just ask any school teacher that I work with, any principal, I'm now Mama Grizzly. But I think there was another lesson. Again, in the Proverbs we learn, it says, when there's no man, you have to be the man. When there's no leader, you have to be the leader. And we realized nobody was going to fight this battle for us. We had to be the ones to fight it. We moved to Israel. We planned to move to Israel for 23 years. Finally, we moved there. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I never cried when I got the diagnosis. They'd sent us through early intervention. We had like social worker, and she was trying so hard to get me to break down and be upset. I was never upset. I moved to Israel, and I cried and I cried and I cried, and I've never cried so much. Moving to a new place and a new system and a foreign language and trying to include my child all over again with a whole set of different challenges. But I learned another lesson then. And listen, this is a very important lesson. It was called, God, give me coffee to deal with the things I can and wine to deal with the things I can't. And while I say it in jest, I think there is nothing more than when you are a special needs mama and you need that coffee, you need that caffeine boost, whatever your coffee is. It could be going to the gym, it could be your time out, it could be whatever, but you need that metaphorical caffeine boost. And you also need to have wine and you need to have time out, because we can drive ourselves so crazy. We can get to the point that we forget what the goal is because we're driving ourselves so crazy. And I'll never forget, I had this moment with Kayla. I was so obsessed, and any of the therapists, one of her therapists is actually on the call now, and she probably knows, like, I was just always like, I'm so focused and obsessed with Kayla. And one of the speech therapists had said, you know, you should speak to her and explain the world to her. So when you're getting dressed, explain what you're doing and use words and speak slowly. And then if you're out and about, and explain to her, and those are fall leaves, and those are, and constantly explain the world to her. And I remember one day I was lying in bed and I was like, and now we're going to have a cuddle. Now we're going to kiss. And I was like, this has gone extreme. Like, I'm actually losing the plot here. I'm so focused and obsessed that I actually forgot, like, the goal is just to have a cuddle sometimes, not always to be mommy, not always to be teacher. And that was when that's the wine, when you've got to sometimes just take a chill pill. Moving to Israel. Oh, I'll tell you another funny story because I think you guys will appreciate this story. But one day my daughter had been going to this play therapist in Israel for a while. And I get a call from her and she says, can my husband and I come in and see her? So we both go in and she goes, could you close the door? So I'm like, okay, we close the door. And she goes, you know, I've known you guys for a while. I feel I can be honest with you and share what I'm really thinking. And then she goes, well, when Kayla plays with the dolls, she always says, Mommy loves wine. And I know moving to Israel has been very, very hard. And I'm just wondering if you've turned to the bottle and if we can help you with counseling. And I was like, no, I'm not an alcoholic, but yes, I am a stressed out mom and I need a glass of wine at night. Moving to Israel gave us new challenges. Kayla's very high functioning, but that's a whole different set of challenges we had to deal with there. There's not the resources you get in New York. You don't have the resources. There's no one managing, no team manager through early intervention or Department of Education Services. I am the CEO of the intervention team. I'm the Mama Grizzly. I am the person who does everything, and it's all in a foreign language. Thank God, Kayla's doing very well. She goes to a regular school. School there is, she's in a class of, like, she just finished 6th grade. She's in a class of 31 kids with a part-time shadow. It's sort of a little bit more like a sink or swim approach. And she sort of managed to, I wouldn't say swim, but she's managed to survive. She speaks Hebrew fluently and English. And I always joke, like, I don't have Down syndrome, but I haven't learned Hebrew. She has. But she's very high functioning, and that comes with its own set of challenges because now she's 13 and she's very aware of her differences, and she constantly talks about the real people and the other people, and we try and give her opportunities to be in both worlds. Very hard to find opportunities in the special needs world. There isn't a GiGi's Playhouse, and we miss a lot of like resources there. But people ask me all the time, how did I get the strength? How did I get the strength to take this all on, to fight it, to get a voice, to write blogs about it, to write a book about it? And again, it comes back to what I say, when you cannot change your reality, you have to change your perspective. And we're taught in life about tests, okay? Life isn't, if life really, you go and we were in India in the Himalayas, and we saw this Tibetan monk, and he's sitting in his garden and he meditates all day and he studies all day. But let's be honest, that's not any of our realities. Most of our realities are about struggling for truth. When you read the Bible, you can see the stories of our forefathers. There were struggles there. They struggles with infertility. They had struggles with their relationships. There we read about wars and rapes and murders. We see in our source that life wasn't simple. If life was simple, then all those biblical sources would basically be talking about sitting on a beach with a cocktail in a Caribbean island, being fanned by someone. But that's not reality. And we know that tests help us to grow, and they help us to grow emotional muscle, and they help us to transcend to the next stage. And I remember after Kayla was born, and I was like still bothered so much, and I was so angry, and had so many issues. And I remember going to the Kotel. So the Kotel is the Western Wall in Jerusalem. So Jewish people believe this is like the ultimate source. This is the place where where God rests. And I was going to go there, and I was going to have like this real conversation, and I was going to be like, why us? I was going to let it, like, I don't know what I was expecting as an answer. But I remember by the time I got there, I had this peace. I had this serenity. This wasn't a journey I chose, but it was a journey I was on, and I could manage it. And I think that's what tests do. It just gives us that spiritual muscle and that ability to grow to the next level. So people ask me, why the name Chutzpah, Wisdom and Wine? What does that have to do with your journey? So some of you may know what the term chutzpah means. You may know chutzpah being, people think of it as Israelis that are like bold and arrogant, and but the real meaning of chutzpah, and this mamas, papas, anyone, therapists, anyone advocating for your children, the real meaning of chutzpah is lack of the fear of the word no. It doesn't matter. You can ask, they can say no, and you can challenge that. That is chutzpah. It's also about living life with passion, because when you have passion, when you care about something deeply, it motivates you, it drives you to be able to go and fight for your child. All of us are passionate because we totally care about what the outcome is. There's nothing more than a parent's passion to drive us. Chutzpah is also about being self-aware, about understanding the realities around us. And chutzpah is about having that ability to cope. It's about knowing it's not perfect and coping anyway. And this one we all understand, watching our children like flowers open up slowly under a microscope. It's about the progress. It's not only about the destination. The journey is what counts. We can't do, I just remember when Kayla was born, and I was like sitting there thinking about, and what about this? And what about, will she get married? And will she do this? And someone just said to me, Jodi, it was another parent who was a little ahead of me. And she said, Jodi, it's about this year. It's about the goals for 16 weeks. It's about the goals for 6 months. It's about the goals for 1 year, about the goals for 2 years. But it's And that for all of us is going to probably be the reality forever, is understanding that it's the progress. Another hallmark of chutzpah is believing that rules are mere suggestions. And I can't think of anything more than dealing with like Department of Education and those things. I remember sitting in Department of Education and the woman who was the head at the time, a PhD from Columbia, and she leaned forward and she was like, Mrs. Samuels, Kayla has normal IQ now, but you know, and she has a PhD in education, but IQ levels off. So you shouldn't really hope that as she gets older, she'll keep the standard. And I started like arguing with her, and my husband like kicked me under the table. I was like, but I was like, what about, you know, you hear these stories of people with Down syndrome who go to university and finish school. And I could just see she leaned forward and she said, Mrs. Samuels, should I refer you for counseling? Have you not come to terms with your daughter's diagnosis? But you know what? If I would have taken her rules and her framework and her structure, I would have stopped believing in Kayla. Instead, I decided I would make my own rules, and I fought her anyway, and I won. It's also, and this is a really essential ingredient of having chutzpah, it's about believing in tomorrow. It's about believing tomorrow will be better. It's about what I started my story off with, about not being stuck in that same story and that same narrative. Things can change, we change, our children change, the journey changes. What is the wisdom in my title? Wisdom to me is having spiritual wisdom. I really believe everybody needs, it doesn't matter what your religion, what your source of getting your wisdom, but you need a guide. You need something to guide you. And, you know, probably many of us had parents who might have brought us up on Dr. Spock parenting. And we see how like one day it's fat-free and then it's sugar-free and then it's gluten-free and now it's everything is high protein. Information changes. Nothing can prove this point more than what we've been through in the last few years between elections and COVID and vaccinations. You can watch Fox and CNN and get whiplash going between them for how different their messages are. You can Google, and there's so many different stories out there. You need to know what's your focus, who you're following, and why that matters to you. And for me, wine has spiritual connections in many religions, but also for me, wine is that opportunity when you stop and you appreciate, that world around you, when you get off that treadmill of being mommy, therapist, wife, entrepreneur, businesswoman, employee, employer, whatever that titles you give yourself, we need to stop and look around and appreciate what we have. And that brings me to my acronym that I say for all of us, that we should all look to have health. The acronym of health, H, we can all do right in the world. We can all contribute. E, to embrace change. A, to appreciate the gifts we have. You know, sometimes it's hard because we say like, why us and all these challenges, but sometimes you look around and you see that like a lot of people have bigger challenges or bigger issues. Appreciate what you have. L, look around you. Look at other people. How can you help? How can you give? Because there is nothing like giving to change your perspective on how you feel about a situation. And T, and this is where I think the GiGi's Playhouse plays a beautiful role, is that we come together in community, bring us together. You know, long before COVID, I already learned this message from Kayla. We've seen our worlds have all been, since March last year, the only thing we know for sure is we know nothing for sure. It's the only thing we know 100% for sure. We've had to change, we've had to pivot, we've had to deal with new realities. And, you know, I'm living in Israel today. Israel just announced like quarantine measures, even if you're fully vaccinated and you're coming back from like America and whatever, most countries, you have to go into quarantine. And Israel's very strict about these things. Just when we thought life was over, and I planned all my book tours in the US and I planned everything, and we know things are going to change again. But what Kayla taught me long before, and it really is the lesson she taught me, life does not have to be perfect to be wonderful. And this class is for all our kids, because we all feel the same way. Because we all know, and I say this for Kayla as well, that I would change the world for you, but I will never change you for the world. And on that note, you know, my blog, Jodi's Voice, you can sign up, Facebook, Instagram, or you can sign up on my website, Jodi's Voice. And I would love to speak in your communities. I would love to speak for your, you know, organizations, your workplaces, high school kids, because I really believe we can challenge mindsets. We can inspire greatness. And I would love you guys to read my book, Chutzpah, Wisdom and Wine. You can see it in the background. And it's on Amazon, an ebook, a hard copy. And with that, my book is very, very honest. And my life is an open book, and I'm more than happy to answer whatever questions anybody has. And nothing's off the table. I'm more than happy to answer anything.
Thank you so much, Jodi. I mean, I'm so thankful you wrote a book, because you certainly have so many pearls of wisdom, and I'd love to check them all out in your book. I wanted to ask, you've clearly led a very extraordinary and remarkable life. So my question is with, you know, the parents who are really struggling. Was there ever a time when you felt defeated and you just said to yourself, you know what, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know if I can do this. And if so, how did you turn that around? And I'm asking, you know, like I said, for those parents who are really struggling and need to know that there is a light at the end of that tunnel.
So, okay, and I come across as very strong, and you have to read my book because you'll know I'm not always that strong, but you know how many times I break down? You can just ask my husband, like today, this afternoon, you know, and just like a real live example, we're transitioning to high school in Israel, and the process is a nightmare. And I'm like having an absolute freak out and breakdown and flip out and every possible word. So trust me, just because I have a strong facade doesn't mean I'm not like struggling inside. You know, there's no magic wand, because a lot of people are struggling, and you struggle in different ways for different reasons at different times. And I remember that someone said to me, you know, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. And you have to it's all about perspective, because we can't change this reality. Like, none of us can go back. It doesn't matter whether we made this choice on purpose, we didn't make it, we were a fertility parent, we had religious values, whatever got us to the point that we're in this situation, God decided we should be those people who have the child, whatever the reason is, we can't go back. All we can do is sit there and say, what can I do in this journey? And I think when I spoke about having a mission statement, you have to ask yourself as a parent, you can't solve everything. None of us can solve everything. What do you want to be as a parent? What kind of parent do you want to be for this child, for your other children? What is your, and make a list of how you're going to achieve it. We can't change the reality. We have to just change how we see this reality, because immediately we're putting these words like, oh, some of us struggle, money, financial. It's not that it's not real. It just doesn't change the reality. You're still struggling, and you've still got a child with this disability and whatever issues you have. It's about having this mission and saying, what do you want to achieve? Do I want to be a fantastic mother to this child, see my kid happy, healthy, grow? Everyone's going to have a different mission statement, what's important to them. But it's about having that focus and knowing what you want. So I think where we go so wrong is we're always looking over our shoulders at other people. And, you know, I had the opposite problem. I would come from, like, I would go to some of these meetings, and because my daughter was so high functioning, she would try and mother other kids that were her age. And I felt bad. I used to walk out of there with guilt because I knew that there were so many mothers who cared and were putting in the effort and were getting New York City resources just like me. And they were utilizing them and they were practicing and they were doing everything. And yet they're kids. And I felt like I'm not feeling bad because my daughter's higher functioning. But you know what, guys? I have my own challenges with a high functioning daughter. She realizes she's different. Do you know how many times she says to me now, Ima, mommy, I don't want to have Down syndrome. It's too hard. I just don't want to have it anymore. And the other day I was trying to go to my knee-jerk reactions of saying, you know, everyone's different and like, you know, there's some people who are fat and some people who have challenges and some people's mummies and daddies are divorced, and trying to give her. And she's like, don't say anything. I'm not interested. I just want to not be Down syndrome anymore. Like, what am I going to say to her? You know, it's hard. Like, what am I going to say? I'm going to wave a magic wand. The point is, it's about understanding that the world, and this is really the message, guys, your world still can be beautiful even if it's not perfect. You can't, it's not about feeling sorry for yourself. It's about saying, yes, it sucks. Now, how am I going to make this journey a little bit better? How am I going to improve the life? And I actually think that most people, resilience is built when we start doing things. When we go out there and we become a leader to others, when we become a resource for other parents who are going through, even if they're going through as bad a situation, you can be that resource because you're ahead in the journey. We all know there's nothing like another mother who's ahead of us in this journey to give, just by giving someone else strength, giving someone else guidance. There's no magic cure. It's about reframing, perspective, pivoting, realizing everybody's dealt a hand of cards in life. I don't know if that is satisfactory.
Thank you. So I just wanted to read some of the feedback in our chat and then open it up to anyone else who has a question. So someone wrote, wow, love it. Thanks, Jodi. And then Lisa writes, you're amazing. What an inspiration you are. Esther wrote, thank you so much for an inspiration to be a strong mom and fight for our kids with special needs and loving them. Thank you, Jodi. So fabulous for all of us within the GiGi's NYC community. So thank you for your feedback. And I just want to open it up now in case anybody else would like to ask Jodi a question. Just unmute yourself. Yamira raised her hand. Yamira, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Jodi, once again. I'm interested. I think I lost some of the timeline. How did your daughter? It's your daughter, correct? Yeah, daughter. How did she adjust to the transition, or was she still too young when you relocated to Jerusalem, or being at that time maybe she was too young? She's adjusted well now to the transition. So I just want to get an idea of her new environment. How did she adjust?
You know what? She went when she was 6, and we put her in kindergarten where she could learn the language. And you have to understand, she had come from a private Jewish day school in Manhattan, in Riverdale. We had moved my kids to another school, and there were 20 kids in a class, and they had 2 teachers, plus she had her shadow or her, her support. And she had a paraprofessional a few hours a week. And she had every little bit of resources in the whole world comparative to Israel. And I remember when we would have a team meeting at school, they would bring in a substitute because you couldn't possibly have the teacher left only with an assistant, and the shadow could be in the class. You had to bring in, it would be terrible to possibly have less than 3 teachers in a class. And then we came to Israel, And a teacher took her sight unseen, no intake or anything, no grilling of us. And the first meeting we had, she left just the assistant in the class, 26 teachers in the class, 26 kids. And she came to a meeting. There was no one else. And you know what? None of the other kids like put their head in the toilet, jumped out, escaped. Okay, it was a typical class. I'm not saying it was a class with kids with challenges besides Kayla. But I think we learned then that the system was just so different in Israel. It was the one system gave so much support and the other system gave so little support. We always used to say, like, there's got to be somewhere in between. But for Kayla, you know, kids are just, they go with the flow. They don't know. She didn't know what she was in. Like, I had a hard time leaving so much resources and having, you know, we went from, you know, board of ed and having speech therapy and occupational therapy and play therapy and physical therapy to once a week occupational therapy and once a week speech therapy, and that's it. And a part-time shadow, which wasn't, when we left, we had like, you know, a SEED, a special education itinerant teacher, someone with a master's degree for 25 hours a week. And then we got like the equivalent of a paraprofessional in Israel, someone who didn't even have their matriculation. So I had a very hard time. Kayla doesn't know the difference, but there's no question in my mind. It's been a very much more stressful journey for her than it would have been in New York. And the part that I feel guilty about is like, we've chosen inclusion. Yes, she's very high functioning and she probably is a prime candidate for inclusion, but we chose inclusion and she's dealing with the consequences of that. So one of my breakdowns that I repeatedly have with my husband is that I feel like we've created so much stress for her. You know, I had this situation that I was talking to a friend who's a child psychologist, and she said to me, I was saying, you know, Kayla picks her skin and her lip and her face, and we know when she's doing this, it's her like stress coming out. And she said to me, you know, and you must read my blogs. I promise I'll make you cry and the stories that come out. But sometimes I like look at her and I see her struggling because her biggest issue is socially. And there she is, like alone, trying so hard, and she doesn't fit into either world. She's too high functioning for one world. She doesn't fit in the other world. I say she spends her whole life like on tiptoes and stretching, and she's in neither world, you know. And sometimes my heart breaks for her, and I see her. And my friend said to me, you know, Jodi, it's not a bad thing that a child has stress, that a child has tension, that a child they learn coping skills. And they said, she's like, this is a skill. She said, as long as your child is getting love and getting support and getting resources and your child knows that she's loved, she's like, it's okay that if there's parts of her day that are stressful. I don't know, you know, I like try to hear that rationally. I struggle with it because I think that Kayla's had a much harder time in Israel.
Thank you for sharing that, because Malik, he's 17. And as he's gotten older and a little bit more mature, he's raised those questions as well. You know, he goes, Mom, why do I have Down syndrome, right? Whereas before he was oblivious and he really didn't speak on it. But as he got older, and I said, you know what, it's okay. I said, you know, mom here, and I try to use different analogies. And I said to him, I said, you know, I have an eye vision you know, challenge. I said, I have to wear contacts. Without my contacts and my glasses, I'm pretty much blind, right? So I told him, I said, it's okay to be different, right? And sometimes he gets it, but then you can see that he doubts himself sometimes. But I think to your point, you know, when you have a child who for whatever reason, you know, the world doesn't see them fitting anywhere, I think that once, if they can build that confidence, Malik is, you know, the more I see him mature each day, and as he's growing, he's so confident, you know, and I think that's also an attribute to the environment. GiGi's Playhouse has been such a blessing to him. His friends, they all, I mean, everybody at GiGi's his buddies, as I call them, they're confident. I think once the child has that confidence, they themselves can defend themselves. And I think as parents, we kind of then, I step back now and I'm like, okay, he can handle that, right? And that stress factor that we ourselves create, right? Because we do create a lot of stress factors without us even knowing, right? I'm at a level where I can say, okay, he's got it. I don't have to interfere. I don't have to, say anything else. So I thank you for sharing that, because that must have been a difficult decision as well as relocating from New York and just creating this world for your daughter. So thank you for sharing.
I think that, we feel, parents feel every moment of their child's pain, every single moment of their child's pain. And, like I'll tell you another story, and it was a similar therapist also gave me this. I was in synagogue and I couldn't find Kayla, and I was like stressing. And then I found her and she's like, no, Ima, mommy, I'm talking to my friends. All my best friends are here. So I look around and I'm like, oh, I didn't know she even had any friends, let alone so many best friends. So I'm like almost happy. And then I see she's with these girls who are like in their, late 20s, who come to my events, who she knows from the events. And my eyes filled with tears. And I was like, I was so sad, like to her, this was her best friends. I go, and not like, at the time she was like 10 or something. And I'm like, not peer age. And my friend, she's a social worker. And she said to me, Jodi, Kayla feels loved, and you can see it. You can see the love and you see the confidence in her. And she said, think of children, that grow up in abusive homes or neglected homes. What they're missing the most is love, the first ingredient. It's like and she goes, it's okay if the love doesn't always come from peers or from the places. We live in a world where we're bombarded with media messages all the time that this is how it should be. You should be thin and you should be beautiful and you should be rich and you should be famous and you should be TikTok star and an Instagram star. But even if we look at our typical kids, they also have challenges. It's not like life's just perfect for them. And, so I think that we have to always, this is about our perspective sometimes, not even our kids, because sometimes we feel pain for what the journey we're mourning rather than the issues. Like Kayla wasn't sad that those girls were her friends. I was sad. She was as happy as anything. And you know what? Since that time, it's actually given me permission. I let her have some of these friends because, okay, you know what? These girls love her. They give her attention. They can accommodate to her. She feels the love. Like, what more as a mother? It's not the only engagement I let her have. She's going to school anyway. She's dealing with life all the time. So what if a few hours a week she feels loved and she feels part of something? And I'll tell you that, you never always know what's going on with your kids. So I was with Kayla and she was going on her scooter. And this is last year. And we had practiced hours and hours and hours and hours. And I cannot tell you how much you guys all know. Physical therapy goes into first getting like up and down steps and walking and running. And like now balancing on a scooter. So we're almost getting it. And I'm like, wow, Kayla, this is so amazing. You're going to be able to go out on your scooter with the other kids. And in Israel, all the been scooter everywhere. And I'm like, and she goes, Ima, I just want to be a regular teenager. So I'm thinking, oh my God, my like heart drops. Here goes the conversation again. What am I going to say this time? So I said, what does it mean to be a regular teenager? And she said, Ima, I just want an Instagram account. And I think that sometimes we are so like focused on the solution that we sometimes missing, we're so busy like fighting the war and the battle that we forget sometimes it's like little things we can tick off the list. And maybe to that mother who asked the question, if we're struggling, sometimes there's little things we can tick off the list. Like, okay, sigh of relief, I can help you feel like a real teenager if you have an Instagram account. Yeah, we have to monitor it, we have to supervise it. And I think my last point in that, because I can see someone else is asking a question, is I remember Kayla was about 6 weeks old and I went to a wedding. And I was, in the Jewish community, getting married is a very big thing, a lot of pressure. And sort of every parent's dream is that your child gets married. And I came back from this wedding and I was devastated inside because I was like, what does this mean for Kayla? What does this mean? You know, is she going to get married? And, you know, she's 6 weeks and I haven't even figured out how to get early intervention services, but I'm worried about her getting married. I was talking to a friend and we're standing by like a corner of like a road in Manhattan. She was about to go in the subway and she just looked at me and she said, you know, Jodi, I'm 36. I don't have Down syndrome. And my mother worries every single hour of every single day if I'm going to get married or so. And it made me realize that sometimes we think like, you know, we're the chosen ones to suffer through all of this, but there are people all around us with challenges. And sometimes we have to broaden our perspective in order to be able to give our kids these positive messages.
Thank you, Jodi. Lanice has a question.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Jodi Samuels, for just sharing, for your transparency and just having this amazing conversation with us. I have a couple of questions. I think I remember two, but later on, if there's still time, if I think of the others, I'll ask. Maybe I'll type it in. The first part is, I know that Kayla is very high functioning. I would like to know, would you say that she is high functioning just simply based on natural aptitude and her IQ? Or would you say you guys had to work really hard in terms of like early education and tutoring and, you know, being in good programs that offer, you know, I'm in New York and most of us know that, you know, different schools offer different quality of education, or it could be different classrooms. It could be one school, but it's about that teacher and their structure and what they're teaching and things like that. So I'm just wondering, basically, would you say that, I'm wondering if you guys, you know, got her a lot of academic support?
So I will tell you this, when Kayla was born and, you know, and we got the diagnosis, my husband's a doctor and he's actually trained in obstetrics, and even he didn't realize that Kayla had Down syndrome. And he, you know, he was like, Jodi, the lights are switched on. He said, I promise you, I can see the lights are switched on. And, you know, we're all born with different like aptitudes and we didn't know what she was going to be. Like clearly Kayla is high functioning. Like she high functioning because she was obviously, there's part of it that was born that way. And I mentioned this before when I went to these other programs and Kayla was the same age as these other kids and she was mothering them. And, you know, there's not a question. She was born that way. If there were other parents who were giving their kids the same therapies, the same hours, the same input, they were doing all the same magic tricks that we were trying to do. And there was not one thing that could really, I could say, wow, you know, I'm just so much better than those other parents. Like at the end of the day, she was just born that way. And I think that, you know, that's partly the genetic. But I joked when Kayla was born and we had a like little party to welcome her. One of my speeches I said, we all know the like jokes about Jewish moms that, you know, push their children and the high achieving children. I said, well, Kayla's going to have no choice. Whatever her potential is, she's going to achieve 110%. So it was not that I could make her higher than what she was, but just like my other kids, I want them to achieve their potential and I work with them for whatever their potential is. And I have a son who's super smart and a daughter who's super creative. And each one we, you know, give them opportunities to increase their abilities. Doesn't help to make, you know, it doesn't help to try and have a bird roar and a lion fly. It doesn't matter what you do, you're never going to change it. The goal is to make sure the bird sings and sings the beautiful song and can fly, and the lion can be the king of the jungle and roar. And they're never going to be each other. And I think we have to look at our children like lions and birds, you know, they're not just because one parent does this. That being said, when you come into that, you have to know what's your mission here. Do I want to do inclusion? Don't I want to do inclusion? Do I want my child to be hidden behind walls, and do I want to be out there? I made a decision in the very first time I went out. I was wearing like one of those baby Beyond gathering things, and I had her face out, and I wanted people to see her. And I made the decision, and people cried. Like it was, people would see me and they would like catch a fright and realize, and they would be, oh, I'm so sorry or whatever. I made a decision how I was going to handle that right up front. That was like my personal mission statement. I was going to, so it's the same way with like your education, with your approach to therapy. You can only do what you can do financially, time. Some people have 9 children, some people it's their first child, some are 18 and a single mom, some are 42 and life experience, but exhausted. They have so many, everybody's got their different challenges. It's about saying what do you want and going after that, and really, really not being scared of the word no, because you get so much no in the system. And I used to feel so bad. I remember sitting at like Port of Ed, District 1, I think, or something. It was like in Harlem. And I would sit there and I would see so many of these moms sitting there. And I knew those women didn't even have like the language to fight if they wanted to. And they didn't have the voice, and they didn't have the confidence, and they didn't believe they had these rights. And you have I don't know if you still have it, but in those days you'd have these so-called parent advocates in the room that I was like, I remember once I wasn't sure if the person was actually alive because she didn't move the whole time. And her eyes were like, I was like, is this person actually alive? Let alone an advocate. And I just remember feeling so sorry because I knew that those mothers didn't believe they had a voice. And part of the reason I've written this book, and part of the reason I go in these speaking engagements, and I speak to communities and I challenge people, because every one of you guys has the right to be Mama Grizzly for your child. And everyone has the right to demand. And you know what? Not all schools are equal and not all programs are equal, but you can ask for more. You can demand more. You can fight for more. You don't have to accept. You just because they dumped you in something that wasn't good doesn't mean, oh, well, we have to live the whole. Okay, if it's the last 6 weeks of the year and they change school teachers or something, you may not have a choice. But you don't have to agree just because the school think this is a better placement, or this actually often saves the Department of Education more money or saves early intervention. That doesn't mean you have to agree. Appeal, fight, argue. What your child can achieve will be a function of the love they get, the input you give them, and their natural abilities. But we took Kayla, and this is really important, and I wish I would have mentioned it before. I forgot to talk about this. But we took Kayla to a place called the Feuerstein Institute. And I really attribute a lot of like their philosophy to our success. And if anybody wants to, maybe you can put it in the chat. The book is called If You Love Me, Don't Accept Me As I Am. So if you love me, don't accept me as I am. And that very much became part of our philosophy, because the philosophy of that, the guy who wrote it, Professor Reuben Feuerstein, in the 40s, when he started believing in the potential of people with Down syndrome, he was told, oh, he's a quack and he's a freak. But with the advent of PET scans and CAT scans and that, they could see that people do change, and they have now neuroplasticity, and everything's very much part of the discussion of special needs and how do we reframe how you can learn, how people can learn. And his whole philosophy is exact opposite of what we sometimes taught. He's like, if you love me, don't accept me as I am. It's not if you love me, oh, God gave me this child. Oh, I'm the person who suffers. Oh, this is my reality. No, I love this child. I'm not going to accept. I am going to make the next goal for the future. And he said to us, the first time we met him, Kayla was 6 months old, and he said, you know what you can expect from Kayla? You can expect a tertiary education and to get married. He said, that's what you can expect. He said, now don't ever be disappointed if she doesn't reach those goals. And I think that's the balance. It's about believing that your child can be more than what they are now. That's the journey. That's the chutzpah. It's believing, like everybody wants you to believe, especially in Department of Education or wherever, where they're trying to cut back on financial resources, that actually, no, your child won't progress, or no, this is the maximum we can offer. No, your job is to believe. Your job is not to accept. and to have the next stage of the goal. And your second job is never, ever to be disappointed when they don't reach their goal. So you can have that goal out there and you can push them. Obviously, not unrealistically. We're not going to push our kids to go to Harvard and become doctors. But we can push our kids each year for the next stage and not be disappointed if they don't reach it. But if you truly love your kid, it's okay to believe they can do more. It's okay to believe that tomorrow they will improve. And if you see any of the kids who are high functioning out there, or kids who've made amazing progress, they probably have one thing in common. And that was their parents really believed they could be more than what they were yesterday.
Thank you so much. The other question that I have is in regards to letting your child know that they have Down syndrome. I'm not sure if everyone, I guess I'm asking you, what did you do? Did you tell, like, what age did you have that conversation with Kayla, and just your whole perspective on it, and basically your perspective on it, and what was your thinking behind what you did and when you did it with Kayla?
So because we were always very open about it, we never hid the fact. We never hid it from our other kids. We always spoke about Down syndrome. We always just had a philosophy in our house that we weren't going to make this the 600-pound elephant in the room. We were going to talk about it. And right from the beginning, people would come to our house and I'd be friends and someone would say something and they'd be, oh, are you nursing? And I knew there was this awkwardness because no one knew how to address, and I'd be, I'm nursing because I believe that nursing's good for the sucking instinct when your child has Down syndrome. I would literally say the words. But as a result, we always spoke about Down syndrome. We spoke about it in front of our other kids. We never made it a secret. This is it wasn't a bad thing that you have Down syndrome. Some people have brown hair, some have black hair, some are short, some are tall, some have Down syndrome. So it was just a natural thing in our house. It was not a taboo issue. And the first time we knew that Kayla knew, she was watching a movie and she was so excited. And she had limited communication skills at that time, but she was she wanted to share. She's like me. And she saw someone who had Down syndrome and she was showing me she knew what it was. And then she became, in the beginning, she was very proud when she spotted someone with Down syndrome. She'd be like, oh, they also have Down syndrome like me. Then as she got older, she went through a stage where she'd see someone with Down syndrome and someone would say that and she would refuse to greet them. She would refuse to talk to them. She didn't want to see the reflection in the mirror. And we had one of these funny moments. We went to a family and we went there for the Sabbath. So for Jewish people, you spend 25 hours. We don't drive. We don't do anything. So we're with this family for the whole Sabbath and they have a Down syndrome kid. And as we're leaving, we're walking out and she looks at Abby and she was, I don't know, I can't remember how old. She might have been 6 or 7 then. She goes, Abby, you have a really funny face. And we all just cracked up laughing because we were like, have you looked in the mirror recently? But I think that she was very aware from a young age what Down syndrome was. She didn't understand what it meant for her per se. She just understood you look like this, just like you look short or you look tall, but she didn't understand. It was only since she's been about maybe 10, then we were sending her to an activity with kids with special needs. And she told us she didn't want to go to that activity. And we said, why? She said she wanted to go with the real people. We asked her what the real people are. And she said, and she described, she said she didn't want to be, and she's there was one kid in a wheelchair and one kid who's not verbal and one kid is a wild boy. And she told us why she didn't want to be with them. I had to look at it also from her perspective because that's not inclusion either. It's not social for her either. You don't make your typical 9 or 10-year-old girl be friends with a 16-year-old boy. So why should she be? Someone who isn't verbal and she is verbal, that isn't a social peer for her. And people have this tendency to just want to say, all special needs people are like bees, you look the same, so therefore you all buzz and sound the same. So it's, we have tried very hard to give her an opportunity to be in both worlds, to feel comfortable in the special needs world and to be comfortable in the typical world. Obviously, somewhere along the line between our messages, society, school, she thinks the other world's the more aspirational world, and she doesn't always want to be with people with disabilities, special needs. We very much push her to be with that because that's her reality as well. And we talk about it and we're very open. And I think that for our kids, it doesn't matter if whatever the topic is, it's best to have honest conversations up front and not hide, because they know what's going on anyway, always behind the scenes. They're sponges that know, they know all the time. So I just think that being honest, and, you know, she's very aware, and she knows that I wrote a book about her, and she knows that she inspired the book.
And when she was younger, would you experience, let's say, I don't know if you had an experience, like maybe if you took her to a park and she was playing with other kids, like have you experienced like other kids point things out about her, like in the moment?
Yeah, I mean, all the time, you know, other kids will say things. And, you know, part of what I feel my role is as an advocate is to try and help other parents know how to talk to their kids about it, how to have the conversation with their children when they see someone that looks different, instead of saying, oh, you know, the parents say like, look away or don't point fingers. Well, okay, you know, that's part of it, but really, did the kid really learn anything? Because next time they're still going to look there. You know, the best thing is for parents to have language to know what to say when your child notices my child's different. And every year, like when my Kayla was younger, at the beginning of the school year, I would send out like messages to the parents. And I would say, if your child asks about Kayla, your child pointing to her, or your child sees another kid that looks like Kayla on the playground, I would say, you know, the kind of things you're supposed to say, instead of like look away but you know, sometimes also we get panicky about these things, and it's not always. Especially I've seen Kayla can be as judgy about other kids as they are, you know, because she doesn't want, she's judgmental as soon as anybody looks a little bit, and she'll be like, Eva, what's wrong with that person? Why is that person? You know, I have to make sure that my answers are consistent to her also. But I was saying about, sorry, my son's just leaving tonight. He's going back to Israel, so I just waved to say goodbye.
You were saying like for them to, you empower the other parents to say that, to teach their kids what to do and what to say.
Once I was at a wedding and I'm holding Kayla, and there's this mother, and she's like staring at me, and she's staring, and I like, every time I look at her, she's like staring at me, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is not even a child, and she can't stop staring. And like, she was on the other side of like the dance floor, and she was like, I was like my every mama grizzly fiber in me was ready to go bite her head off. And as soon as the music stopped, I like walked over with a purpose, like I was going to like literally. And she looks at me and she goes, I just can't stop staring at your daughter. She's so beautiful. She goes, I'm a member of the tribe. I also have a daughter with Down syndrome, and I'm like admiring your daughter, and she's so beautiful. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, she's so beautiful. Like, but I like that 1 minute before I was ready to like rip this woman's head off, and a minute later I'm like, oh, she thinks my daughter's beautiful. But it was a lesson to myself. Like, I had to be like a lesson to me about, you know, we're always judging all the time. And it's not about the judgment, it's about the conversation. It's about the children knowing how to react. It's about educating the teachers how to tell the children. It's about having, so now what we do at the beginning of each school year, depending on the year, and if it's a new class or whatever, we go and talk to the kids. And we talk to them about Kayla, and we tell them, and she sits in the class, and we don't say anything that we wouldn't want Kayla to be comfortable with. We've been doing this since she was about 10. Because I feel like, and this is really important in today's world, every kid has devices, and they're all Google, and they're on TikTok, and they're on this and they're on that. And kids can go and like look up Down syndrome and get a whole bunch of information that just makes your child. I mean, I know I read a book when Kayla was born, What to Expect When You're Expecting. And like that's What to Expect When You Have a Down syndrome child. And I remember reading the book and thinking, oh my God, I've given birth to a monster. It's like had 276 things that could go wrong with a Down syndrome child. And I was like, can you imagine now taking a kid who goes and Googles Down syndrome or watches some TikTok thing and gets all the information from that? I'm like, no, we'll be the source. And we go speak to parents, and I will speak to high school children, and I'll speak to rabbinic students, and I speak to medical students, because I think we as parents all can help the public and give a voice to what does it really mean to live with a child with Down syndrome.
That's really, really good information. Now, do you share that information in your book? I'm just wondering, how do we access that? Like, do you share that on your blogs? Like those types of tips?
Yep. So a lot of this is in my blogs. A lot of this is in my book. And I also have a page called Kaylee's World on Facebook. So you can follow her on Kaylee's World. And I post a lot of real life updates with tears and joys and everything. So you can see my Jodi's view of Kayla unfiltered. And in addition to that, and I don't mind, you can post my email address, Jodi@Jodi's Voice, and you're all welcome to message me. I'm happy to answer anyone. I'm happy, to speak to people and share, because there's a lot, and everybody has got children at different stages and different realities, but I'm really happy to help people with resources or speak. You may have a play group of moms, you may have a classroom. I'm happy to speak to different communities and organizations or people one-on-one.
Okay, awesome. And do you primarily, are you primarily interested in speaking engagements with groups or parents who have children with Down syndrome, or it's just disabilities in general?
Both. I mean, I speak to both. I think there's a lot of work to be done in the organized special needs world, but there's so much money that goes into special needs right now, whether it's through church groups, Jewish groups, city funds, state funds. But I sometimes think that we've created like this narrative of how we spend the money, and we're not challenging the thinking behind why we spend the money in that way. And it's become this system of let's just make it as less painful for every parent as possible. Like, let's just throw resources at a problem, but it's not really, we're not really addressing some of the fundamental issues. Like, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what level of functioning your kids are. And I hate the term from that point of view, like high functioning and that, because we start then creating a like layered society. Oh, high functioning kids get this and other kids get. At the end of the day, every single parent wants their child to be included socially, community, school. Even if it's at their own level, they might go to a special school, but you want your kid on that playground to be included. You want your kid to feel loved. You want your kid to feel accepted. And we've like just created this whole system where we just funnel resources instead of challenging the narrative, challenging the mindset, challenging the thinking. And I think it's time to move to the next stage. So I'm happy to talk on a like strategic creating change in community. And I'm happy to give practical advice to a group of peer moms.
Awesome. Powerful. That's powerful what you said about the challenge and the, the reason why and how, the thinking behind it. That's really important. So I definitely wish you the best in that endeavor. And I don't know, I know I don't have to tell you this, but keep going, go forward with it all. You're going to go regardless, but I'm just telling you, yes. My
book's called Chutzpah, Wisdom and Wine, The Journey of an Unstoppable Woman. But
I have it. A young lady blessed me with it. I forget her name right now, but I joined this talk once before. So this is my second time doing it. It was a library that was hosting it. And I think it's a financial advisor.
New York Public Library. The New York Public Library, probably.
Yes. And I think the young lady who connected me, she must have sent me that information. And then I joined it. It's so bad that I don't remember her name right now, but she's a financial advisor in Manhattan.
So my hashtag is unstoppable. And we can all be unstoppable. Every single one of us can be unstoppable.
And on that note,
Mm.
have to stop. We are a little over time, but thank you so much, Lanice. You asked awesome questions, and your baby
Thank
is
you.
adorable.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for all of your wisdom that we were fortunate enough to be bestowed with. I will be picking up your book as well. And I will send an email with the information for your book in case anybody else is interested if you don't already have it. But thank you, thank you, thank you. You truly are a remarkable woman and an inspiration to us all. So thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. I know it's late and this is a time commitment. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you all hearing me out, and I look forward to hearing from you. Put a review on Amazon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.